Is the world a better place? This is the question our project is about. Or, if I should put it in a different way, how can data help us see the progress the world has made in the past 50 to 100 years? Hi, I'm Hugo.
Hi, I'm Alex.
And you have Dua right here. And the three of us, we've been working on this project for the last 2 weeks. Before we start, let me ask you a question. Over the past 100 years, do you think deaths from natural disaster have increased, decreased, or stayed about the same? Raise your hand if you think it has increased. Yeah. Raise your hand if you think it has decreased. And raise your hand if you think it stayed about the same. Okay, I could spot a majority of people thinking that it has increased. Well, let me tell you that it has actually decreased. And by a lot, way more than you think. Over the past 100 years, deaths from natural disaster have decreased by 91%. And this is exactly the kind of bias we are trying to fight with this presentation, right? How biased we are on the world's progress and the state of the world. The thing is, we're wired for bad news. I mean, you just turn on your TV and all you see is disaster, war, inequality. So it's really easy to think that the world is actually falling apart. But what if data was telling a different story? So this project, the aim of this project is not to say that the world is perfect, right? That would be naive. No, the goal of this project is to zoom out, take a step back, and see the different story that emerges from data. And I can tell you that it's a story of quiet and steady progress, way miles away from the headlines you're seeing every day on the news.
So guys, how did we go from our data to our final insights? First, we made sure that we had data sets reliable. So we collected our data from trusted global sources like Our World in Data. Then for data preparation and our EDAs, we primarily used BigQuery and Python to make sure our data was clean and to make our first explorations. And then for our visualization, we created this presentation to tell a clear and accessible story for everyone. But as we are data analysts in our core, we didn't stop at the first global average that we found. We actually dig deeper in different indicators. And we saw differences between countries, continents, and income levels.
So we decided to focus on 6 global trends that are used by international organizations to track progress by country and regional level. For example, our first indicator, life expectancy. Here we can see a clear representation of the evolution of life expectancy between the 50s and 2023. And actually nowadays we are living 24 more years than back in the 50s. And when we dig deeper in our data, for example, here we decided to make a grouping of our countries by income groups. And as expected, high income countries are living longer than lower income countries. Nowadays, high income countries live 16 years longer than low income. But what actually is nice to see here is that the gap is shrinking and really fast. Back in the 50s, the gap was 30 years. And now we also have here Explore More button to show a bit of what we did on Looker Studio. So this is where we really deep dived in our data. For example, now we are on life expectancy indicator. On the left, we see the same trend that we saw before. And we can see like a clear setback by COVID. But despite these setbacks, the trend is clear. It's going up and humanity is living longer than ever. On the right side, we have a map that shows the average life expectancy by country. And we can see this cluster of lower income countries in Africa that still need to improve a bit. For example, if anyone has a request of a country that we should look and or are interested to see, go ahead.
Yes. Brazil?
Let's go. Mas passo. So there you go. You can see the massive improvement of Brazil. And besides this, we also have all the other indicators that we explored. maybe Hugo, you can just quickly show. We will dig deeper on this data on our presentation, just to quickly show that we made all this work for every indicator. So maybe let's go back to our presentation. And another indicator that is really good to show that the gap between the countries is shrinking is access to electricity. In just 2 decades, since 2000, 2.5 billion people have gained access to electricity. And this is one of the biggest successes of humanity. But despite this success, there is still a lot of work to do. There is still 700 million people that remain without access to electricity. And most of these people are living in the region of sub-Saharan Africa, as we can see here on the map marked by these black dots. So I guess that the last mile is the hardest challenge. But when we dig even deeper on these countries, here we have a graph showing the comparison between 2000 and 2023 on countries that have almost 0% access to electricity in 2000. And if we have a look to them, for example, Somalia at almost 0% in nowadays is about 50%.
On the graph you're seeing here, you're seeing the evolution of extreme poverty in the world. What you have in white is not in poverty, and what you have in blue is in poverty. And on the left, you have the year 1990, and on the right, you have the year 2020. And if you have a look at this graph, what it's saying here, it's that 1 in 4 people in 1990 were living in extreme poverty. And fast forward 30 years later, in 2020, you have 1 in 10 people now living in extreme poverty. So since 2016, almost 90% of the population is not living in extreme poverty. This is one of the fastest changements we've seen in the world history. And when we were looking at that data, we actually saw that the progress was coming from one main part of the world, which is Asia, and also like those 3 countries in Asia: China, Vietnam, and Bangladesh. And what you see here is the progression of these 3 countries between the year 1990 and 2023. And you can see that China and Vietnam, they basically eradicated extreme poverty. And Bangladesh dropped it by 62%. So this is just number on the slide, right? But when you think about it, these are hundreds of millions of people that have been lifted out of extreme poverty in 3 decades. That is absolutely crazy.
So let's go to the next indicator, which is natural disasters. And that's how we started our presentation, because it's one of the best indicators that can show what we are trying to show, because it's basically all the time on the news, and it's really easy to think that we actually are doing really bad. But in truth, when we dig on the data, we are going far better than back in the 30s, for example. As we can see here, in the 30s, almost 500,000 people have passed away due to natural disasters. But fast forward to today, we have dropped this number by 91%. So this basically means that we are far way better protected than back in the day. And in the early 20th century, what was killing millions was droughts and floods. And due to better protection and better infrastructures, today they are far less deadly than before. But actually, there is a few new threats showing up. For example, extreme temperature, extreme weather, earthquakes, that we have to be aware nowadays. And another indicator that had a huge progress is global maternal deaths. Here we have a representation comparing the year of 85 with 2020. In 85, almost 580,000 women had passed away giving birth. But as far as 2020, we cut this number in half. So it's safe to say that a mother's risk of dying during childbirth has halved in 1 generation. And when we dig deeper on our data, we can see that the biggest gains came where we needed it the most. Here, there is a representation between 85 and 2020 of the 5 countries that had the highest maternal deaths per 100K back then. For example, let's take a look at South Sudan. It had almost a rate of 175. Fast forward for today, it dropped by a lot. Like every other country, they dropped by 70 to 90%. And to finalize global maternal deaths, here we have a final representation dividing the countries by income groups. We can see straight away that high-income countries had solved this problem decades ago. But what's really important to see is that the lower-income countries are catching up, and this is really a global success story.
Another global success story we want to talk about is the one of child mortality. Today, children are 3 times more likely to live past age 5 than in 1991. And this progress happened all over the world. Yet, when we had a look at the data, we could see that there was still a gap. We had a look at the data for rich country and for the poorest countries. And as you can see on the graph here, this is the number of deaths per before 5 per 20 births for the 10 lowest GDP countries. And as you can see for these countries, there's still 2 babies dying out of 20 births. For the richest countries, it's 1 in 227. So there's a huge gap to fill here. The good news is that even the hardest hit places are seeing progress. What you see here is the 10 countries with the highest child mortality in 1991 and their progress versus the year 2023. You can see that they all progressed. And for example, if we take Somalia, you had 45 deaths before the age of 5 out of 100 births. So it's almost 1 baby out of 2, which is crazy. And they dropped it in 30 years, they dropped it all the way to 10 deaths per 100 births. Guys, thank you for listening. We want to conclude by saying, of course, the world is far from perfect. But if we take the time to look at the data, it actually shows undeniable progress. By really zooming out, taking time to take a step back, all we see is a story of lives saved, poverty reduced, and opportunities expanded. So the world is getting better. We just need to take the time to see it.